I've been looking forward to this all day.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Good evening, everyone, or afternoon. Welcome to the Eustis City Hall. This is a City Commission workshop meeting. Mary, is there a quorum present, proper notice been given?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you so much. This workshop is on ordinances, comprehensive plan, and land development. It is Wednesday, June the 2nd, and it is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Lori, I'll turn it over to you. Keep it
Good
upbeat, song and
afternoon.
dance.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Before I start with the presentation of the proposed amendments, I'd like to introduce you all to Heather Croney. She is our new senior planner. She comes to us most recently from Lake County. She has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from UCF, and she's scheduled to take the planning certification exam to become certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners in November. We're happy to have her, and we're looking forward to getting her up to speed and presenting to you all in the near future.
Who is the happiest to have her?
Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Do we need to ask that question?
Your grin says it all.
Yes.
She already looks, you know, she already looks so much relaxed. It's the medication, though, right?
Mayor, Commissioners, Lori Barnes, Development Services Director for the record. At the last commission meeting, we had two ordinances on the agenda, one for amendments to the land development regulations and one for amendments to the comprehensive plan. They were both on the local planning agency agenda to find consistency with the comprehensive plan before moving forward to the commission. And one of the members at local planning agency asked for these to be tabled to a date certain so a workshop for discussion could be held. On April 15th, I had presented some proposed amendments to the land development regulations to the City Commission and also discussed some proposed amendments to the fence regulations and asked for Commission direction to move forward with an ordinance. Unfortunately, we weren't able to present that ordinance on May 6th as I was unexpectedly unavailable. On May 20th, the Commission did not hear the ordinance as it was tabled at LPA. The proposed ordinance to amend the land development regulations involves Chapter 110, Development Standards, and 115, General Building and Design Standards of the land development regulations. Most of these amendments are very minor. Most of the amendments are very minor to address discrepancies, inconsistencies between sections, and to clarify for practical application of the code. The First Amendment provides some discretion to the Development Services Director as far as exempting certain types of appurtenances from our height limitations. The exemption section lists a number of different types of items that can be exempted with much specificity. We had an instance with a proposed improvement at Florida Foods in the past, which the food storage silo they were proposing was not listed specifically as an exemption, but it was very similar to these other types of accessory structures or appurtenances. Now, ultimately, Florida Foods opted not to go with the design they had planned. However, staff felt having some administrative authority to avoid a waiver application and public hearing application, for instances where we might not have specifically a water tank. A food storage silo is not that much different in nature than a water tank. We cannot possibly list every possible appurtenance or accessory item associated with a building or a site in this section. So if commission has no concerns, we'll keep this proposed amendment in the ordinance that will be presented tomorrow night.
So basically what you're saying is you're just giving you leeway? That's what this is saying? Thank you. Just want to clarify.
Everybody good?
Man,
Okay.
The next amendment is to the section that addresses measurement of standards. This section had some relatively awkward language that doesn't clearly reflect the intent. Our code requires a street setback, and that street setback is not differentiated whether you are a primary street frontage or a secondary street frontage. There are instances where a subdivision is platted with a double street frontage. The plat restricts, so you cannot use, for example, the frontage on Washington Avenue to access your property, but internally. There are other instances where properties weren't platted that way, but a property owner has asked that, well, we want to put a pool in, or we want to put a shed in. We can't do it with a 25-foot setback requirement on our secondary street. So this language has always been in the code, but it said you have to have a non-ingress egress easement. Very awkward language. So we like to clean it up and provide for the deed restriction to be placed on the property, restricting access from that side of the property as long as that accessory structure remains. Basically just cleaning up language. Nobody knows what a non-ingress egress easement is because there is no such thing. Okay. Any commissioners like to pull this amendment from the ordinance?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Questions, Willie?
Had to read it a couple of
No,
times.
that's fine. Take your time with it.
Yeah, so
On any of this, take your time and understand it.
I guess, and
please.
that's what I just want to say. So you're saying that if they've got two accesses to their house, if you will?
If they're on a corner lot, or if they have a double frontage, so there's a road at the front of the house, a road at the back of the house.
Okay.
In a suburban neighborhood design district for a house lot, they'd have to maintain a 25-foot setback on the front and the rear, or on the front and the side street, without some kind of provision that allows them to treat that secondary street as a common lot, which changes their setback to 10 feet. It gives them more land area to place improvements on their property.
And so then they can enter from either way?
The vehicular, the access restriction on the secondary street
Okay.
is what allows us to treat it as if it were an interior common lot line,
Got it. Okay.
okay?
Got it.
Oh, good.
So I'm envisioning in my mind, I was thinking like on the corner of Washington and Prescott where I lived. So they have a back driveway and then they have one in the front on the side. So that back one is the secondary one, is what
Correct.
you're saying.
Correct, and if they wanted to place a structure within 10 feet of their property line on that secondary street side, we'd say no. If you want it to be treated as a side yard, you're going to have to restrict your access to that side,
Okay, got it.
okay?
So if you have a house on the corner of Grove and Lemon,
No way.
I just picked that.
Random.
Yeah. Lemon would be your secondary. Grove is the main. Or does it have to be where the driveway is?
It can be whichever side you choose to have your primary access from. So for example, actually that's kind of a different animal than what I was just talking about, because that's an urban corridor district, not a suburban district. So the setbacks changes, everything changes. So in the urban corridor, your house lot setback's 10 feet. Your accessory structure setback is 5 feet, and you can only have an accessory structure in the side or rear yard. So if you wanted to change everything up, move your driveway to Lemon, eliminate your drive on Grove, if you wanted to place a primary structure at a 10-foot setback or an accessory structure at a 5-foot setback, you would do that by recording a deed restriction prohibiting access on Grove until such time as that accessory structure no longer exists.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, is everyone okay now? All right.
Everybody good?
Yep.
This next amendment is regarding the lot width for the duplex lot typologies. We believe this is an error in the code. In suburban neighborhood and rural neighborhood, your lot width requirement is 90 feet. In urban, it was listed as 35. You cannot place a duplex on a 35-foot wide lot. It just is not possible. So we think they were looking at the width of half of a duplex lot, so we're making a correction. Any questions or concerns?
You're correcting it to 60?
60 for urban.
And is 60 the standard for urban for just duplex? Or
No.
just
Every lot typology differs. A house lot typology in urban is 40 foot. A house lot typology in suburban is 55 foot.
Got it. So it's typically 60 for a duplex in urban? Or do we have that? Are we creating that?
We're creating that
Creating.
because 35
I knew
is
that.
not,
I just
right.
didn't know.
So 60 is reasonable. Now, we do have a provision in our measurement and standards section of the code that provides if your lot was platted before 2008, before the adoption of our current code, and you don't meet the minimum requirements, you can still utilize whatever allowable lot typology we have for that district. So this is not going to create any roadblocks or nonconformities for something that was platted before 2008 or already built before now. Okay? Okay.
And that was just for duplexes?
Just duplex lots. Okay. The next is the townhouse lot typology, which is an oversight, we believe. The townhouse lot typology provided a maximum street setback of 10 feet. The footnote provided that in urban districts, the garage for the townhome would have to be set back a minimum of 18 feet. So differential setback for primary structure versus accessory structure, the garage. We have this footnote on every other residential lot typology, our estate lot, our house lot, our duplex lot. But we have differential setbacks for primary structures in urban versus suburban. So what happened here was a condition where you could have a maximum street setback for a townhome in a suburban area of 10 feet. You weren't held to the 18-foot setback for the garages, and that provides for no vehicle stacking in the driveway in front of the garage, creates problems with on-street parking, parking in the yards, etc. So in order to provide for consistency between suburban standards on our other house lot typologies, we're changing the maximum setback in suburban to 20 feet. And the 18-foot minimum for the garages will be 18, regardless of the design district the townhome lot is located in. Questions or concerns on this item?
The house setback 20 garage setback 18.
No. Maximum of 20. We have minimums and maximums in our code to provide for form and function. Does it feel urban? Does it feel suburban? Does it feel rural? In urban areas, you've got a smaller setback, and suburban areas, you've got a wider setback. In rural areas, you have a wider, even more still, setback. So in this case, if they wish to have, you can see the street setback is 0 to a maximum of 10 in urban. If they wanted to have their townhome at 5 foot with a recessed garage at 18 foot, they could still do that. Same in suburban. If they wanted to have their primary frontage of the townhome at 10 foot, they'd have to recess the garage to 18. Still, to have that suburban feel for a townhome development, the maximum of 20 will apply, whether it's the primary structure or the garage.
I need pictures.
Me too.
Me too.
Yeah, I
was thinking field trip, Willie.
The 0, the street setback, is that for the house? That's for the townhome? 0 to 20,
Correct.
okay. So,
It provides flexibility in their design. If they want to have a townhome that has a 0 street setback and they have a rear alley loading situation for their garage, then that's a case where they might want to bring the front of the townhome up to the build-to line. Okay?
Gotcha.
This
Understand.
provides them some
Yeah,
flexibility in
yeah.
design. It's not, you must meet this. It's, you have,
Flexibility.
right. Well, you know, what's your vision for your neighborhood? What's the look and feel you're trying to accomplish? Do you want front-loaded garages? Well, if you do, then you're going to have to maintain that 18-foot setback
I
to your
gotcha.
garage.
I think the question is it theoretical to have a 0 setback for the main part of the structure and 18-foot setback for the garage?
well, once she said the alley, that clicked for me.
Yeah.
Then I know what you're talking about. Townhomes, and you can actually go from the sidewalk right into the, yeah, that clicked.
It's right
So,
there.
Yeah,
Right. This gives them some flexibility in their design.
okay, perfect, okay.
Etowah's a good example of that. They've got a lot of that back end
Yeah,
alleys.
yeah, that makes sense, okay.
We're ready to move forward now?
The minute she said the rear loading,
Yeah,
I knew
yeah, I
exactly
was-
what you
yeah.
were.
Everybody good?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, section 110-5 addresses accessory structures and uses. This section of the code, like most we are discussing, has been in place since 2008 or before. This particular section did not include the word use. It says an accessory structure shall be considered. It did not include the word use. So we are clarifying that language. The next section where you see the strike through, this section of the code provided that if you have an accessory dwelling unit and it's part of your primary structure, it was subject to a minimum square footage requirement of 450 square feet. That same minimum did not apply to a detached accessory apartment. Given the movement towards smaller accessory dwelling units or they're interior to a primary structure or in and out building.
Okay, I'm probably going to be that commissioner today. When you added or use, what did that do?
It clarified that accessory structures or uses shall be incidental. For example, an accessory use could be a home occupation. A home occupation is subject to limitations so that your home business does not turn into a full-fledged commercial operation and inconvenience your neighbors. So an accessory use should be incidental to your primary use. And it should comply with all of the other standards that we have in the code related to accessory uses or accessory structures.
I know they were talking about, they talked about home rule, and the League of Cities is
Yeah, that's what-
discussing this
yeah,
right now.
yeah.
And, it was giving the cities the ability to not
Yeah.
be able to work their own thing just like this. And so I couldn't help but think, how is this tying
See,
into
that's what
all
I
of
was thinking
this?
too.
Right, it wouldn't necessarily be limited to home businesses, and if the limitations on local government regulation of home occupations were to come to fruition, we would look at all of our home occupation regulations and determine what we can keep and what we will need to eliminate.
I guess at what point do you, let's just say you have a cottage industry and you have running a little cakes out of your house, if you will. At what point does it become, with the traffic and how busy do you get, at what point do we finally say, or can you say,
Enough.
enough's enough, and you need to go get brick and mortar in a commercial location at this point? What point do you say that to them?
Under our current code, we can't.
I didn't think so.
Right, under our current code, we have limitations. You're limited, certain types of businesses are not permitted to be operated from a home business. Our code provides you cannot have traffic in excess of what would normally be seen in a neighborhood. And that can be observed and counted. Home businesses are not permitted to have employees that live outside of the home. What happens when they do is people come to work in the morning, they park in the yard, they leave their cars there all day, they come back, they're loud. Outdoor storage associated with a home business can't be seen from the right-of-way or a neighboring street. Otherwise, we would have dump trucks in our residential neighborhoods at our neighbors' houses. So, we do have limitations now. We can cite someone for being in violation of the home occupation regulations. If the changes in the state legislature come to fruition, we'll go back and look at our codes and see what we can keep and what we have to abdicate.
So just kind of circle back a little bit, how does that tie into this?
A home business use is not the only accessory use that you can have. Okay. So, again, since the title of the section is accessory structures and uses, and this one paragraph did not say or use, we thought we should add it so that we
Consistency.
are consistently applying the code, and that if we were to try to apply this particular paragraph to a concern, we cannot be prevented from moving forward because the language doesn't specifically say an accessory use has to be in full compliance with these regulations.
Okay. I hope you have to kind of dumb it down for me. So that's why I'll be asking you a lot of questions today. So don't take offense.
So on the 450 square feet, you just started putting limitations on it with that the strikeout, but in this one, they have to go with the land development regulations. Am I saying that right?
Okay. The strikeout, we're eliminating that minimum 450 square feet if you have an accessory apartment inside your house. Why would we require a minimum square footage inside your house if you can have an accessory structure in an
Outside.
outbuilding
That's right.
that doesn't have to be 450 square feet?
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Any more questions, concerns? Okay,
Just for, when you say it like that, we all get it. We don't speak this language.
boathouses. Accessory structure setbacks apply to accessory structures. Setbacks are measured from property line to the closest point of the structure. Most property lines do not extend into a water body. We do have some within the city limits, but most lot lines do not extend into the water. Those would be called riparian lines, which is an imaginary extension of your property line into the water. We can't require a setback to an imaginary line. Okay? There are other regulations regarding docks that will apply, minimum square footage, minimum catwalk width. If they exceed those, they need to get a permit from DEP or St. Johns River Water Management District or an exemption letter from them. The DEP requires that you center your dock within your property lines. We believe that covers setbacks, especially in light of the fact that we can't require a setback to a line that's not a property line. Questions, concerns? Fences. You will not see the entire fence code in this presentation. You will only see the additions. We've had some instances, and we ran through this in April, where we've had individuals installing 2 or 3 or 4 foot sections of fence 2 foot away from their property for the sole purpose of screening their garbage cans or screening their mechanical equipment. Our code requires permits for any fence installed on the property, regardless of how small or where it is located. And the purpose for that is to make sure that the fences meet our land development regulations as to height and placement. When there is a situation where this fence was clearly placed for that purpose and is not within a required setback, we'd like the discretion to not require the homeowner to obtain a permit. Questions, concerns?
You say that last part again. That was a test.
Right, where it is clearly for the sole purpose of screening trash cans, mechanical equipment, and it is clearly not within a required setback and not exceeding the maximum height, we'd like administrative discretion to allow that without requiring a permit. Okay, barbed wire, we talked about in depth on April 15th as a separate agenda item. Staff was directed to bring forward the changes to allow barbed wire fences, not only in association with agricultural uses and conservation districts, but in general industrial on fences 6 foot or taller, on properties where an industrial building lot type or industrial complex lot type has been approved. On properties, this number 5 limits the fencing for municipal locations, whereas the current regulations allows them on any government property. This limits us to wastewater treatment plants, and electric substations where they're clearly required for safety, for the safety of the public, so they don't go in there and hurt themselves. And also atop fences 6 foot higher, and then provides for an exemption for existing barbed wire fences installed prior to December 2016, which have been verified as legally pre-existing by Development Services staff. While staff does still have concerns about the aesthetics of barbed wire fencing and the expansion of that use, Commission has discretion to adopt any change to the ordinance that they deem appropriate. Questions, concerns?
I do. I know we talked about the GI. We knew about the conservation and the ag. We knew about that. There was a GI, and there was 2 that we had discussed.
General industrial land use, atop fences
We
6
had a
foot or
couple.
taller.
Remember the color code thing we had?
Properties where an industrial building lot type or an industrial
Oh, it
complex
was the
lot
industrial.
typology has been approved.
Got it. I was looking for like the GICON. It was the industrial one. I was just looking for that little comma thing. That's
Do we have areas that are close to residential developments that would have barbed wire? Do we have anything like that existing now?
We do. There are many general industrial properties along the railroad tracks that are in close proximity to existing residential development. Some of those already have barbed wire fences. Some do not, but could with this change.
The city also does too. And I have to tell you, Lori, I know when you put on the exception for the properties, I don't really have a problem with if you covering the city stuff, that never bothered me at all. My point was for being able to do both, you know. For me, it was all about that double standard. But I don't have a problem with around any city piece of property. I never did. So I don't have a problem with if you want to leave it with any city. That doesn't bother me at all, so.
Okay, under number 5, Lori, properties containing water/wastewater treatment plants. That wouldn't be water treatment plants. That would be water retention ponds and things like that, correct?
No.
No, it's everything.
No.
Treatment plants.
No, retention ponds are not required to have barbed wire, and they are located in residential districts. Retention ponds, if they have a slope exceeding 4 to 1, they're required to be fenced for safety.
But they don't have to have the barbed wire.
They do not have to have the barbed wire, and they wouldn't be permitted to under our current regulations or under the regulations that are being proposed now.
Well, I think if you look like the wastewater, they don't want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
jump over it.
But see, and I think about that with the kids.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah.
It stops, it prevents.
Yeah.
Ready to move
Good.
forward?
We're good.
Portable storage units, long-term storage containers on commercial and industrial parcels. This regulation requiring them to be fully enclosed by a brick or masonry wall has been in place since at least 2008. The change that's being proposed here provides for some administrative discretion in cases where site conditions may warrant a different treatment. For example, in a case where a storage yard is to the rear of a building, it cannot be seen from a public right-of-way. The adjacent property building is built at a 10-foot setback with no public access to that 10-foot strip between the two of those buildings. In a case like that, a brick or masonry wall to screen the view of these storage containers, or Connex boxes as they're more commonly known, is not really practical, and it's not a development decision that's predictable, fair, or cost-effective. This provides us with some administrative authority for unique circumstances. I can assure the commission that if you can see that storage area from a public right-of-way or an adjacent property owner, and they do not want to put the wall or masonry enclosure, it will come to the commission as a waiver through the site plan review process.
What are we doing with, what will we do with the units that have been there since prior to 2008? How do we grandfather them in?
Those are pre-existing non-conformancies. They can remain. However, if those containers are removed, that non-conformancy is eliminated.
Okay,
I get it.
okay. And that would be from this point backwards, not, they would remain, the ones that are in the city now.
The only thing that this change does is allows me, as the Development Services Director, some discretion when you have a new, we're not talking about pre-existing, we're talking about an existing business is expanding their operation and their rear storage area. And rather than build new buildings, they'd like to use these Connex boxes for storage. During the site plan review process, without this change in red, if they don't put a brick or masonry wall, even though you can't see it from the road, I have to advertise a public hearing and bring it to the city commission and have the city commission approve that waiver. We are talking about seriously unique site conditions, not something where you can see this from the road, you can see it from an adjacent property. This is a very unique, this section that's being added will be applied in the most unique of circumstances.
Not born out of convenience or desire.
This is just giving Lori flexibility.
Does it give flexibility to make sure they're in good condition? Because I've seen some that look like, well, I can't say it, but they don't look good.
We have a number of Connex boxes on properties that predate 2008,
Yeah.
that have
I know.
been there for years and years and years. We cannot retroactively apply our code to those properties where those conditions have existed for years and years. Now, if they remove those boxes, or that business moves out and a new business moves in, we can impose our new standards so that they are properly screened from view.
I think the question was, those containers that are currently permitted under a non-conforming status, if they become unsightly, bad condition, falling apart, can we require replacement or removal or improvement of them under nuisance violation?
Yeah,
Just code,
exactly,
code,
yeah.
Can we call code enforcement and say, y'all got to clean this up?
We can call
There's a
code, you
risk
can
to
call code enforcement. If there's obnoxious growth, we can address that. I am not certain that we can apply the International Property Maintenance Code to a metal Connex box. We can require cleanup of the area around them.
Let me ask you this, so let's just say, if they're in a fenced area, can they put the slats on the fence?
Not if it's a new.
If it's
But
new.
No.
existing, yes. but not new.
Existing, if they're willing, if it's pre-existing, non-conforming, there's no fence, they can certainly fence it and
I mean,
put
if the
the
fence is
slats
already
in.
there,
The
if the fence,
definition of existing being that it existed prior to 2008.
Right,
That's
we
2000.
cannot require them to put slats in the fence if this is something that has been there before 2008.
So if somebody put some on a property in 2020 technically under the code right now, they're supposed to put the masonry or brick enclosure.
Ooh.
Right, so if they went in 2020 and they didn't apply for a site plan review and they did not provide the wall, we would give them code violation for noncompliance with the land development regulations and require them to submit a site plan and show their brick or masonry wall or apply for a waiver to come to the city commission.
Okay,
The reason why I was asking about the fencing, because, you know, I know what kind of fencing you were talking about. I was just trying to ask, there is chain link there. Could they just put the slats
If,
in lieu of that,
The wall.
the wall or that
Yeah.
it
fencing?
would take an amendment to the current conditions of the code.
Or would that come with a waiver? Could they ask for that in a waiver? You know, could, if, let's just say the commission,
They could ask for a waiver from
And
the
then-
city commission. They would need to justify that waiver and, you know,
the commission could turn around and say, let's just say we decided to let them keep it. However, you need to put those slats in, whatever you want to
That
call
would
them.
be his waiver request stating that
Got it.
in lieu of this, I'm asking for a waiver to allow me to put in slats in the fence.
Got it.
You just say code enforcement would monitor or be there if it became kind of trashy and everything to make sure
So
they
if there's
keep it.
obnoxious growth, if there's trash, if there's accumulation of materials outside the boxes, we can address that through our existing ordinances.
At what point would we, because I've seen some that are starting to rust out, at what point would code enforcement get involved? I mean, or you utilize your discretion to say, hey,
She's got
stop
it,
it?
yeah.
Okay. Under our current provisions, we're not going to see them rusted out. If they are pre-existing, non-conforming, we can address obnoxious growth. We can address accumulation of materials outside the box. As far as the appearance of the box itself, I will verify with the code enforcement supervisor, but we cannot, I don't believe, and I will verify with him tomorrow, that we can apply the International Property Maintenance Code for structures, for example, to temporary metal Connex boxes. So if this
temporary.
rusting out or bad-looking boxes that are pre-existing non-conforming are an issue, we will research and see what legal authority we have to conduct any enforcement on those, and I will get back with you.
Yeah, the reason I ask is we're trying to, and I'm sure everyone up here is thinking the same thing, you know, we're trying to move the city forward and, you know, and let me use Winter Garden for an example. You know, we're trying to become Winter Garden-like. And when you drive through and you see these Connex boxes, and some of them I've seen are pretty bad. How do we do that? And I know, yeah, we gotta figure it out.
Because it sounds like she's saying, like we can't.
Their hands are
really.
kinda tied.
Yeah, it's gotta be some,
It depends on the interpretation of the
Yeah.
Florida and property maintenance codes.
Well, and at some point, especially if it becomes a safety issue, then that's, I think, the conversation turns.
Yeah, if the
You know what
door,
I'm
if the hinge of the door is rusted and the door is hanging, I think that may be an unsafe condition.
Understand that. That's what I would, that's where,
Okay.
that's where I would have gone next, you know.
Okay.
You know, you kind of wonder at what point, if that metal box has been there for 10, 15 years, at what point should that property owner put an addition on his
Exactly,
property?
yeah.
Or
It's no longer
or-
temporary storage.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what I've
not
been sitting here
temporary
thinking the
anymore.
whole time.
Or should they, you know, rent a storage unit to put
Right.
their things in? But I don't know that we can regulate that
Can't
either,
regulate
so.
that.
Yeah.
do we have a definition for temporary storage? I mean, that's what it's supposed to be for, so do we have
Well,
anything
This
that
is all prior to
addresses it?
2008. Anything before, you know, after 2008, that's a different conversation. 2008 and before, that's a whole, that's all grandfathered in.
So
Well,
it was,
And it may be a case of the Florida Building Commission, given the tendency for these Connex boxes now to become long-term storage, quote, buildings, they may want to start putting regulations in place to say how these need to look, how the condition they need to be in, and so forth, like other structures under the Florida building.
The can of worms.
Yeah.
Big can of worms.
It's clear that you're interested in having some more information, and we will bring that
Yeah.
back to you at a later date.
Okay, thanks.
We could,
It's just bigger
Just for
picture.
procedural, this is still advertised to be on the agenda for both the LPA and the commission tomorrow. If we don't get the information to you in time for tomorrow, then the motion would be to make the amendment less this here.
Okay.
But do we have an issue with this?
Actually, this, no, I think it's just.
It's bigger picture.
It's
Yeah,
it's
bigger
a
picture.
bigger
I don't have a problem with
expansion.
this.
Yeah,
So
this, no.
this, there's no, I don't have a problem with this.
It's just, I think our concern is
It's-
bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can bring back more amendments to the land development regulations at any time. It does, more restrictive regulations on storage containers can come later, if they even need to be implemented. Again, I understand Commissioner Hawkins wants to know what kind of enforcement can we legally engage in with regard to these pre-existing non-conforming containers, and I will bring that back to all of you as soon as we can do some research.
The point being is these changes don't affect that.
Right.
No,
So
no, no, yeah,
our
we could approve
recommendation
that.
would be to move forward with
Yep.
that.
And anyone that's there now, they can come before us and get grandfathered in.
Anybody
Away.
They're
that,
already grandfathered in,
well, those that were placed in.
before 2008.
Before 2008,
Yes.
to stay in their continued position,
Yeah.
notwithstanding any enforcement
But you can't
issues. Lori
leave them.
may find.
You can't pull it
Any
out.
that came in after 2008
Yeah.
are required to comply with the code.
And the ones after 2008, they don't let you know that they're putting them there? With the site plan and all that, correct? They just show up?
Any improvements to property, change in intensity of property, should go through an administrative site plan review process at a minimum. A full site plan modification if they're requesting waivers to the code. Not everyone asks for permission. Many ask for forgiveness. I am not aware of any sites that have Connex boxes that are non-compliant that were placed after 2008. If there were, we have addressed them and had those property owners come in and go through the correct process.
How do you know?
I say, yeah, how do you know?
How do we know? Our code enforcement officers drive around this city daily. They receive complaints regularly. They do not miss much. Most
they
of
weren't
the
here before
time, when
2008?
we have an inquiry from the city manager or the city commissioners or the police department regarding code enforcement, we already have an active code violation underway.
Providing the employee was here before 2008.
Our code enforcement supervisor has been here
He's
for
not the only one.
20
Yeah,
years.
he's not the only employee, though, under code enforcement, so.
We have one other code enforcement officer who has an eagle eye, and if he sees something that he thinks is not quite right, he touches base with others to see if this is something that needs to be addressed.
It's not difficult to verify if our code people to see a Connex box, if it's been there before or after 08. That can be.
We have historical aerials, we have lots of resources available to us.
Now, would the portable storage units only apply to the Connex type containers?
Only if they're long-term storage containers. We have other provisions in our code for temporary storage containers, for example, pods when people are moving. Same for commercial properties. They're allowed to have them for no longer than 30 days, and then they must be removed. The long-term storage containers are only permitted under these provisions in commercial and industrial.
Well, the type of containers I was talking about are the portable dumpsters.
That's just where I was thinking.
Yeah. Does that apply to those as well?
It's not a
Because-
storage unit, though.
Those aren't
No,
storage.
That's what I was asking. Does that
Okay.
apply just to Connex?
Yes, it applies just to Connex boxes, okay? A 2-yard dumpster that somebody brings in because they are renovating their house cannot be there any longer than their permit duration. So if it stays there, they're in an active construction site, they can have a dumpster. If they do not have an active permit for construction and they have a dumpster that is not in keeping with our other regulations regarding dumpsters, it will have to be removed. If they have an active building permit, it can remain on site until the permit expires, at which time it needs to go.
I may have to talk to you about that afterwards.
Somebody using a dumpster for storage?
Because I've seen a dumpster, I know it's been there for at least a year and a half. But I'm going to double check.
It's COVID. Building anything can take a long.
And they're not building.
Oh, well, there you
I'm
go.
pretty sure they're not building. So
It's not a commercial business or a multi-family structure?
it's not multifamily, but there is a commercial business, but it's an auto repair shop.
On the property?
Yes, but I'll double check. I'll call you.
But we're in
Yes, sir.
agreement that this is okay.
Yeah, this is okay.
All right, section 110, 5-15 are particular restrictions on placement of storage and other buildings. We believe this was an oversight. It's the same section as accessory uses. It's applying different standards to storage and other buildings versus other accessory structures that might be placed on a property. So we're cleaning up language and we're making sure that these provisions would apply to temporary structures as well. Any concerns? This revision to the driveway widths cleans up some language. The driveway requirements used to read single-family, single, single-family, double, and then commercial one-way and commercial two-way. We felt that it's clearer and more defensible to apply a non-residential standard to a industrial use. Says it's commercial, well, I'm industrial, why do I have to have an 18 to 24-foot drive? So we're cleaning up language and we're clarifying the difference between residential and non-residential. The other change we're making is requiring an 18-foot drive, an 18-foot wide drive on collector or arterial roads. If you go down Orange Avenue, you'll see plenty of homes with a 12-foot wide driveway. On higher speed collector roads, that's simply not practical or adequate, and we think 18-foot is going to improve the safety condition. It will only apply to new construction or modifications as time goes by. The other clarification we're making is limiting the number of driveways on a residential property to one if your lot is less than 70 feet wide. We've had a number of instances where individuals with a 50-foot wide lot have two driveways. We have no separation of driveways between one driveway and the next driveway on the adjacent residential lot. So we're trying to provide some limitations to curb cuts, some separation, and improve safety conditions with this change. The Public Works Director worked on this section with me, and he agrees. Questions, concerns?
And that would include duplexes. Would that include duplexes? 25 feet between driveways?
House lots. House lots are not duplex lots. I can't guarantee 25 feet between driveways on a duplex lot, okay? House lots are your regular single-family detached lots that have no need for two driveways in most cases, especially not on a lot less than 70 feet wide.
And if someone on Orange Avenue came in and they wanted to pour a new driveway, would that change anything, or would it be the same?
They could replace their driveway in their existing driveway location.
Okay, so they wouldn't
No.
have to? Okay.
No, this
Because
is,
it
Just
was-
can't make it bigger.
right,
Right.
this is new. This is,
Okay.
you're adding another driveway. New construction, new construction on Orange Avenue, you're going to be 18 foot wide. You're going to design your site so that your driveway placement is 25 feet away from the adjacent existing driveway, which can be done.
Okay,
Sometimes you have to flip your floor plan, but it can be done.
okay.
Questions, concerns? Section 115-3 provides for residential compatibility standards in urban districts, suburban districts, and rural districts. These provisions have in the past resulted in challenges to subdivision plan approvals the City Commission granted. The staff back in November made some modifications to some definitions in the code in an attempt to clarify the legislative intent of the commission and the city in application of these regulations. Even after those modifications were made, there was still questions raised about ambiguity of the language and differing interpretations of the code as far as practical application to a development plan approval being requested in the city limits. Now, our comprehensive plan calls for providing for residential compatibility through the use of landscape buffers, natural areas, and traditional development and transitional development practices. Our comprehensive plan also provides that we make development decisions fair, predictable, and cost-effective. The prior provisions in the code required that new lots adjacent to existing lots be 85% of the adjacent lot widths. We can discuss all night the differences between existing developments where large lot subdivisions were approved with no common area open space, no landscaping, no stormwater areas. Those subdivisions were designed based on antiquated standards that don't compare to current requirements. Common area open space, park space, stormwater area to prevent runoff into our lakes, wider right-of-ways, etc. not to mention our code provisions that call for clustering of residential lots to provide for wide expanses of open spaces. 100-foot wide lots, no common area open space, no stormwater do not provide that. So when you're building a new subdivision adjacent to an existing subdivision with 100-foot wide lots, it's apples to oranges. So in planning practices and in comprehensive plan design and land development regulation design, the goal is to make standards consistent and measurable. And also to eliminate the possibility of ambiguous language, differing interpretations in order to clarify the Commission's legislative intent and to protect the city from legal liability and challenges of subdivision plan development approvals made by the City Commission. When we talked about this in April, I let the Commission know that we would be coming back with some recommendations. These recommendations are in the ordinance that was proposed to you last week. The red language that's proposed to be added reads, the compatibility standards below provide standard and predictable measures for establishing and creating compatibility through landscape buffers, natural areas, or traditional development practices in an effort to lessen impacts and integrate development along the edges of properties where different land use districts or densities are present. Again, this is as provided for in our comprehensive plan and our land development regulations. So adding this statement to clarify the purpose of the following regulations is sensible. Now, again, these standards are in addition to our design district standards in Chapter 109 that call for compatible lot typologies. In our suburban neighborhood design district, we don't allow multifamily lot types adjacent to existing single-family lot types, those kind of things. So these are added standards beyond what's already in our form-based code to provide for that compatibility. So, urban district compatibility.
Let me back on this one. What I think I hear you saying is that there may be an area or development that has larger lots and then another one comes in small. So you're saying that we would use the buffers and landscapes and all that to create to create an area so that it's not so obvious. Is that what you're saying?
We'll get there.
Okay.
And yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying instead of this 85% of the adjacent lot width, which, okay, what's adjacent? What's a butt? When should this apply? When shouldn't this apply? As we move forward, you will see that we're proposing measurable standards and options for property owners and developers. If you want to provide a landscape buffer between your new lots and the existing lots, great, it has to be this wide. If you don't do that, your lots have to be 85% as wide as the existing lots. This gives us a measurable standard and eliminates the argument of what is abutting, what is adjacent, what do those definitions really mean? This should apply here, but it doesn't apply there. So measurable standards and options is where we're going with the modifications we're proposing in this section. And the Commission can propose something else. The Commission can say, no, we don't like what staff's proposed. We'd like to do this instead. So as we move forward, I'll try to explain the reason why the differentiating standards for urban, suburban, and rural, and why we think these measurable standards are going to place the city in a better position than we've been with the ambiguity, the arguments about interpretation, and the lawsuits.
Because I will tell you, and I was just going to ask you, and I assumed after listening to this, I'm like, this is all over this abutting and adjacent situation, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
We were on the other side, and it was extremely confusing. There was and there was a lot of turmoil to go along with it as well. And so, at some point, you're like, you don't even know what you're listening to. It was pretty difficult on that other side. It really was, because we were hearing from everybody. So I'm glad that we're going through this. Thank you.
Okay, so before we drill into the details, the city has a form-based code. We have transects. We have urban transects, suburban transects, and rural transects. Your urban development pattern, smaller lots, smaller setbacks. Suburban, a little bit larger. Urban, wider landscape buffers, that kind of thing. Where those design districts transition from urban to suburban and suburban to rural, we want to impose some standards that create for a practical transition. If you're in an urban district, for example, and you've got 40-foot wide lots, you don't want the adjacent property that just so happens to be in a suburban district to have 100-foot lots. Doesn't really provide for a practical transition from the urban look and feel to the suburban look and feel. So what we're proposing is standards that will create for a flow between urban, suburban to rural. So you will see your new lots adjacent to an urban district can't be more than 110% of the width of lots, unless you landscape buffer, unless you this or that. And then when you're making the transition from the smaller lots to the larger lots, they must be this % wide of the existing lots, unless you landscape buffer this wide, etc. 115.3.1, we're suggesting some changes to clarify the transitions within a design district. That title we addressed in the introductory language on the slide that you saw previously. We wanted to clarify that we're talking about design districts abutting design districts. We're not talking about residential and commercial. We're talking about design districts, urban, suburban, and rural. So when we're talking about an urban design district abutting an urban design district, so you're in the same area, you're in the same neighborhood, there's no change to a suburban area. You're going to have new lots sharing a common boundary with existing lots. The width of those new lots can't be more than 110% of the width of the existing lots, unless those existing lots are non-conforming. That's providing for that consistent look and feel. We want our urban areas to feel urban. We don't want to feel urban here, and when we cross, and we get halfway down the block, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like an urban neighborhood anymore. This will help prevent that. This will help prevent a situation where you have a 100-foot lot next to a 40-foot lot, where you have, which are already under 109, where you have a house with a 10-foot setback right next to a house with a 30-foot setback. This provision will keep the urban areas looking and feeling urban. Next, when you have an urban area abutting a suburban area, the language used to discuss maximum lot widths not exceeding the side or rear lot width of the adjacent parcel. Again, abutting, adjacent. Does this apply? Doesn't this apply? When does it apply? We are proposing measurable, predictable standards. If you have an urban district adjacent to a suburban district, your new lots can't be less than 60% of the width of your suburban lots, unless you provide a landscape buffer 7 to 10 feet wide. You're providing that residential compatibility with landscape buffers. Or you design your site so that your required park space are between your new lots and those existing lots. Or, appropriate in an urban area, a buffer wall. Not appropriate in suburban or rural, because we want those connected open spaces in those areas. But in an urban district, a buffer wall is a solution. Questions, concerns about the measurable standards and the options available to give flexibility in design and make sure that we know, okay, that 60% rule applies if your lots touch each other. But if you have a buffer, if you have a park space, if you have a wall in the urban district, that 60% width rule doesn't apply. Questions?
I just think part of the heartburn prior to this was nobody wants to be in that transition. That's what I'm gathering. I like it, but I think that's what part of the heartburn was from.
Suburban districts. Again, we're looking at if you've got an existing suburban development in a suburban district with an existing suburban development, and you're going to have a common boundary, those new lots are going to touch those existing lots. Your new lots can't be more than 150% of the width of the existing lots. Again, we want suburban. We don't want suburban look and feel, rural look and feel in the middle of our suburban neighborhoods. We want to create that suburban neighborhood feeling. Again, if the existing platting lots are non-conforming to our current code, then that wouldn't apply. If the lots don't have central sewer service, that requirement would not apply. If the lots may need to be sized larger to accommodate septic and drain fields. So, we're trying to maintain that consistent suburban feel, yet we don't want overreaching limitations preventing a property owner from developing their property when we are not able to provide them with sewer.
So what was that difference, from the lot size? They couldn't be any more, but what's the additional that we'd have to give them to make up the difference for the sewer and septic tank?
It depends.
Okay.
Okay, you can have up to four units an acre if you have water but no sewer. Okay. 4 units an acre. Our house lot is not substantially they're going to be able to accommodate their septic system and still meet this limitation. We don't have any suburban, we don't have so many vacant lands in the suburban area that don't have sewer or that are not, or that have substantial unplatted, undeveloped land. Okay? But this doesn't place inordinate restrictions on a property owner if they don't have sewer. We'll let them size their lots, whatever the health department says it needs to be sized. Okay? Now, for suburban districts abutting rural design districts, if the lots share a common boundary with existing lots, they have to be 75% of the lot width of the existing adjacent lots, unless a larger landscape buffer than in urban, park space provided between the existing lots and the new lots, and that's that. Predictable, measurable standards that provide for a reasonable transition between urban to urban, urban to suburban, and suburban to suburban. And here, suburban to rural. You're not going just from 55-foot wide lots to acre lots, unless you're providing that compatibility with your landscape buffers, garden space.
I have a question. How's it determined that here's an urban development, but then someone comes in and want to do a suburban? How does that happen?
Our design districts are set. We have a design district map that shows you where the urban districts are, where the suburban districts are, and where the rural districts are. Our code requires that a consistent development transect applies, which is why when someone requests annexation into the city limits, we bring forward to the City Commission their request for their annexation, assignment of a Eustis land use designation, and assignment of a Eustis design district. If an applicant in an area that is already designated as suburban neighborhood on our plan asked for an urban neighborhood design district because they wanted to build commercial or multifamily, it's not consistent with the established development transect. That's recommending denial. And we're explaining to commission, here's our development transect. We are supposed to transition from urban to suburban to rural, out to the periphery of the Eustis urbanized area, which could be defined to include property out at 437 that we provide water and sewer to. But the idea is to provide a transition from our urban core to the outlying areas. Has to be consistent. If it's not, we don't recommend approval.
When did we put our design district standards in?
2008.
Okay.
Okay. Rural design districts. Rural design districts has to be consistent. The density has to be consistent with the maximum under the land use designation. There's no changes to this introductory paragraph for rural districts. Applicants had to demonstrate development respects the context of the adjacent uses. Now here, in the strike-through language, the city in the past had standards that were not measurable. The first paragraph that's struck through there says that we should ensure the overall density shouldn't exceed 25% unless it's specifically reviewed and approved by the city commission. It called for analysis of these surrounding densities, but didn't establish how far out you look, what neighborhoods you compare. No measurable standards. So for example, under this provision, if a subdivision request came before the city commission and they were asking for 3 units an acre next to an existing 1 acre per lot subdivision, and say they looked at surrounding development within a mile, and a 25% increase would only give them 1.5 units per acre. Well, developer would say, well, code says that as long as the city commission reviews and approves the density over 25%, I'm good. We have no predictable, measurable standards. The commission's approval in that case is completely and totally arbitrary, and it sets the city up for challenges in court. The language needs to be refined so that those standards are predictable, measurable, understandable, and not subject to interpretation.
Now, what we're doing now, does that work for things from this point forward?
From the second reading and adoption of this ordinance by the city commission.
What about projects that they haven't brought anything back to us?
Anything that has an official pending application would apply under the provisions that are currently in effect and are allowed to continue under those provisions.
Okay.
Can't change them midstream.
You can't change an application process that's already in a process.
Okay.
So similar to the urban design districts, this provides for the consistency within a design district. If you've got an existing, between suburban and rural, if you've got an existing suburban district and the rural design district is adjacent, we want to provide for a rational transition between that suburban and the further outlying rural areas. So the new lots would not be allowed to be more than 200% of those existing suburban lots adjacent, unless they're non-conforming or unless sewer's not available. Now, where a rural design district abuts another rural design district, those new residential lots sharing a common boundary with the existing residential lots would need to have a lot width of 85% of the existing lots, unless a landscape buffer, 15 to 25 feet wide, wider than what would be required for suburban, wider than what would be required for urban, or the placement of park space type in between those existing lots and those new lots.
Can you go back to that again? I'm not quite sure I understand it. I told you I'm going to be that guy today. So.
Okay, so these standards apply for these design district transitions, but the standards, at least for the landscape buffers, are going to be different if you're in urban, suburban, or rural. So we're flipping back to urban.
Mhm.
Okay? So if you have an existing urban development adjacent to vacant property that has an urban design district, the existing lots are 60 foot wide. The new lots can't be less than 60% of that 60 foot wide. Okay? And that's actually impossible, because the minimum is 40 foot wide in an urban district. So the existing has 60 foot wide, they want a 40 foot wide lot, they're okay. If they want a 100 foot wide lot, not okay. Providing for consistent neighborhoods and transitions. So, here, if they want the lots to be less than 60% the width of the existing lots, say for example, you've got an anomaly. You have an urban neighborhood that has 80 foot wide lots in it. They want to do 40 foot wide lots in this new subdivision. Well, if you want 40 foot wide lots, you have to either put in a 7 to 10 foot landscape buffer, design your subdivision so that your required park space separates your new lots from those existing lots, or you need to put the wall in.
Okay.
That's urban. Then you jump to suburban, and suburban, you're looking at 75% of the width of those existing lots. So if you have, again, an anomaly, a existing neighborhood in a suburban district, 100 foot wide lots. This rule says if those lots share a common boundary, they have to be 75 foot wide. Unless you put in a 10 to 15 foot wide landscape buffer. Or you design your subdivision so that your required park space separates your new lots from their existing lots.
And that's suburban to suburban.
No,
That
it's
is suburban to rural.
To rural, okay.
Rural to rural. Then we get to the wider buffer.
15 to 20.
Okay, so here we're 85%, unless a 15 to 25 foot wide landscape buffer or the park space. Now, again, these are predictable, fair, measurable standards that provide for the residential compatibility through landscape buffers, natural areas, and transitional development practices, just like our comprehensive plan says they should. And I cannot promise you that the city will be protected from legal liability and lawsuits regarding development plan approvals in perpetuity because of this change. I wish I could. But this does minimize the ambiguous language and the possibility that differing interpretations could create arguments about whether the standards apply and could call into question, if a case goes to court, of whether the city commission should have applied those standards. More questions?
Take a break. My head's about to explode.
I think the common boundary really brings it, you don't have to worry then about, is it adjacent, or is it about, it has a common boundary. That's one thing. And
You want a picture? Here's your one district, here's your next district. If you have a buffer, this can be narrower. Or if you have the park, this can be narrower.
Okay.
That's the easiest way to describe it.
Okay. So it makes for a smoother transition into the other neighborhood.
Correct.
The flow.
into the other design district.
Right.
Design district, that's
It's
right.
not
You
as
don't- You don't
evident.
have lots going like this.
Yeah, it's not as
transition
evident that the
out
lot-
to the
yeah.
beginning.
Okay.
It's not as evident that the lot is smaller
That's exactly
because you've got this buffer in between.
There's only one more thing, and then.
Can we
loading-
can we
loading
finish
an
this
off-street
section
parking.
before we go to the next? Would that be okay? Or you need a break? All right, let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
Thank you.
Run now, run.
God bless you, Lori.
I tell ya.
Jeez.
Can you imagine going to school for that?
Oh, no.
Okay, please note, I cannot pause the live streaming. There's no function for me to do that.
So press your buttons.
Oh,
Let's still pick up.
Yeah.
No, well, it'll pick up some.
Just keep in mind, everything is still heard.
Yeah, you cannot address a question to all of the commission. You can take one aside and ask them a
We're not in
question,
public
commission.
session right now.
Until we go into public session, you cannot ask them a question of all of them at one time.
I'm not far from it.
Hey, how much more do we have to put? Just that? We got quite a bit more to go on.
I'm done.
Shall we have another session?
You can say when we're done with this, we can put it off another night.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's finish a little rest and call it a day.
Oh, God.
It's your call.
Set another time. It just makes you want to just kick the bucket.
I want you to see I'm opening a new box.
No.
Hey, what you need?
Thank you. And I hardly ever do this.
Adjunct? Really?
Didn't you say press
Do I
the
not
button?
believe it?
Didn't you say?
Push button.
Thank you.
I'll take some chips. I'm good.
Hot water. We probably need to eat something with that Advil. Go ahead and die, see, we care.
Whoa.
I still have 2 more that I ordered.
You did get a plan.
Hey, we'll
Thank you.
Take care.
Who's got dark chocolate?
here, right here.
Oh, here's something.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Need more, Karen?
I'm good.
Thank you.
Give me yours.
I don't need no more. He needs to bring the chips. I'm done sugared out.
I kept thinking about opening these. I said, no, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Need some water, Lori?
Need Advil? Oh, God.
You need hit you in the head? May help.
Yeah. I started to bring him. I had one in the truck. But we switched cars. I started to bring one in there just for you to hit me with it.
So we'll finish this and then
Whatever y'all tell me.
let's just finish this.
It's your call. Your call.
Do I have that look? I just feel that tension right
I got a lot of attention. Oh, Cheetos.
Are Cheetos in this? Are those the real
Those are the
Cheetos?
cheese doodles. They're close enough. Yeah.
Popcorn. Thank you. Well, only 80 calories. Put this popcorn.
Thank you, sir.
Cindy, you want anything?
What's the new young lady's name? What's her name? The new young lady.
Heather.
Heather.
What thing?
How long has she been on?
First day was yesterday.
Oh, girl.
I hope she comes back.
But she came back.
Maybe not after tonight.
Please don't speak it, it might come to life.
Has she left for the day? She gonna come back? What you got?
Popcorn, cheese doodles.
Cheetos.
Barbecue.
You guys are Cheetos.
These are left over from the cheese. Fried with cheese.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel so much better. I wish we would have had this in January. I wish you-
Scale says she can hear us eating our Cheetos.
Calm down, Gail.
Gail, by the time we get out of here, you can make us dinner. You know that, don't you?
Tell her I need some chicken and dumplings.
I got an Instant
She
Pot,
knows
so
you-
I should be able to cook dinner like in 15 minutes, right?
Right?
What?
Well, in theory, Karen. Come on now.
Appreciate
Karen
that.
cooking. That's like my mom jumping. I have to tell you, are they hearing us?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Gail says she heard heard us asking for Cheetos.
Are we ready?
As soon as we get the city manager back. You know what? Who needs him? Let's go ahead and go back to work.
All right,
Let's go.
all right, I got the
I feel so
audio recorder is back on.
Okay. Ms. Lori?
much better.
Okay. So, changes to residential compatibility and design district transitions. I think when we took a break, we hopefully had a better understanding of what's being proposed here, and we're ready to move on.
Ready to
Yes?
move on?
Okay. The last change proposed is to our loading and off-street parking requirements. There were several categories in our parking standards table that did not indicate required parking standard for those uses. Correctional facilities, parks and recreation, utilities, transportation terminals, amusements, extensive, mining, quarrying, hunting, and fishing resort all indicated that parking requirements would be determined during development review. Those are not predictable, measurable standards. The American Planning Association has a planners advisory service, and they put out a bulletin that lists required parking standards for all types of uses all across the United States. Rather than create a condition where someone could contest whatever standard staff determined during review, we need to have a basis. So rather than go through each of those, this many parking spaces per this building square footage, We can do that if you wish to. They're outlined in the ordinance that's in your agenda packet. But know that we looked at varying cities, how they compare to the population of Eustis, and what those parking requirements for those uses were before we proposed what's being shown in the ordinance that will be before you tomorrow night. Simply trying to keep the city out of trouble.
Question, and it, something just came to me when you talked about off-street parking and loading and all that. With the way that housing is changing, tiny homes, how will this affect any of that?
This won't affect any of that. Our parking standards have
No, not just, I'm sorry, not just this, but everything that we're trying to do. I just thought about that.
none of these minor amendments affect tiny homes. None of these minor amendments affect anything other than those specific provisions. How they affect tiny homes would be dependent on where they're being proposed. What is the design district? What are the adjacencies? What does the subdivision layout look like? Parking standards for every other use are specifically listed. 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, 5 per 1,000 for restaurant. These said, to be determined during the development review process. Not predictable, measurable standards, arbitrary, open to interpretation, and completely capable of resulting in a court challenge for whatever decision City Commission were to make on a project of this type that came before you.
Good.
Yes.
When preparing these amendments, staff considered consistency with the comprehensive plan, specifically planning principles, development patterns, provisions regarding maintaining residential compatibility, neighborhood compatibility, and roadway compatibility. Therefore, the amendments being presented to the LPA tomorrow night and to the City Commission are consistent with our comprehensive plan. We don't need to talk about noticing because we know Mary noticed this workshop and the ordinances were properly advertised for being heard by the City Commission tomorrow. That concludes the land development regulation amendment portion of this workshop.
I have a question, Lori, and I think I probably know what you were leading to about the tiny homes.
Yeah.
We don't have a specific area where tiny homes would go, do we? It's just based on where they would maybe apply, if you will.
Cottage lots are permitted in urban districts.
Urban.
Cottage lots would be a lot that would accommodate a tiny home.
That's 40.
40 is an urban house lot. Cottage lots are much narrower.
Okay.
And I usually can quote it, but I do not want to be mistaken.
Yeah.
These things
Yes.
are about the size of a shed.
Yes,
really.
right. So
Yeah.
cottage lot is basically the same size as a mobile home lot, okay?
Okay.
Now, a tiny home can be built on any lot
I
type.
was going to ask, can you put a tiny home on Suburban?
You can put a small house anywhere you want, as long as your building complies with the Florida Building Code requirements, you may. Now, a tiny home on wheels is considered a mobile home.
That's a camper.
And that's a camper. That can only be in a mobile home district. We do not have minimum housing, living area square footage sizes, and I would not recommend that we do because the Supreme Court has found in cases that those are a violation of the Fair Housing Act because they discriminate against a specific socioeconomic segment of the population. If you're requiring a minimum home size of 18,000 square feet, not everybody can afford to live in your community. The Fair Housing Act calls for you to provide a diversity of housing types, sizes, and price points so that anyone who wants to live in your community is able to find a place that suits their financial ability, their family situation, what may have you.
So they fall under urban?
They fall under urban.
I just didn't know if we had, I think I knew what you
Yeah.
were talking about. I think Willie was alluding to the fact that if it was like very site-specific area, what would that do?
Right, if someone wanted to have a cottage lot within a suburban district, they would need to request a waiver.
Okay.
Sorry. I didn't do it.
I'm glad my will's up to date. I'm sorry.
It's all right. All right, Lori, what's next, and how much longer do we have?
And do we have to do it today?
We have as much time as you would like. The comprehensive plan text amendment was discussed by commission at the workshop in January. Staff proceeded with the ordinance for the proposed amendments. Similarly to the LDR amendment, it did not move forward to City Commission at the last City Commission hearing. I am happy to go through the items tonight with you. I have as much time as you need. The commission can opt to continue it to a different workshop. However, if you do that, we would ask that tomorrow, Ordinance 2110 is continued to a date certain, so we don't have to pay for re-advertising. And, the other option is if, I know that some of you are more comfortable than others as far as the changes that are being proposed. When we met in January, we focused on particular changes, and I advised that there was a lot of duplicative language in our comp plan that needed to be eliminated, or should be eliminated, and a lot of specificity in our comp plan that should more appropriately be included in our land development regulations. And I'll give you an example of why you see all that strike through in the documents provided. The comprehensive plan is supposed to be a broad collection of goals and policies. That's your framework. These are our broad-based goals and policies, and then we build our land development regulations to provide the specificity for those goals and principles. Eustis's comprehensive plan is 161 pages long with 33 maps. Taveri's comprehensive plan is 92 pages long with a lot of fancy graphics because they just redid theirs. So some pages are cover pages, and 24 maps. Mount Dora's comp plan is 99 pages with one map. When your comprehensive plan contains duplicative language, when you make an amendment to one section, you may not realize that it's in the future land use element. Oh, but wait, it's in the open space element. It's in the conservation element. It's in the parks and recreation element. There is no, duplicating language does not make that goal or policy any stronger. It provides for a longer, more burdensome document. It provides for possible inconsistency between individual sections of the comprehensive plan or between the comprehensive plan and the land development regulations. So much of the strike-through you see in those supporting documents is just that. We've got the same language in 4 different elements of the comprehensive plan. We don't need it. There are other instances where we have inconsistencies between the comprehensive plan and the land development regulations, or we have language that is so specific in the comprehensive plan that if there were a unique circumstance where a property owner asked for a waiver, the commission wouldn't have authority to grant that waiver because you can't waive comprehensive plan provisions. You can waive land development regulation provisions. Comp plan, broad, goals, policies, big picture. Land development regulations, in the weeds, specific. This is what staff applies when they review a development plan before they bring it to commission and say, look, this complies with our land development regulations. Most of the changes were just that. Cleaning up language, eliminating duplicative language, clarifying confusing language. The meat of this amendment, eliminating rural residential land use designations, agricultural land use designations, and making those map amendments that were discussed at the workshop in January. So if the commission would like to run through the PowerPoint tonight, I'm happy to do that. If you'd like to hold, schedule another workshop, meet with me individually, the ones that have more questions than others, I'm at your disposal.
I have to admit, having you go through this like you're doing is helping me a lot. So I just don't want to have overload because I have the attention span of a much younger guy.
I didn't say that.
Emily's down here on the phone.
So I don't want to go any further tonight, and I'd like to come back again.
We do, and I would say if we're not going to finish tonight, we do need to look at this as a group because this deals with maps.
Yeah.
Yes.
It deals with urban sprawl. It deals with a lot of things that we are dealing with as a commission
Yes.
right now. So my recommendation is if we're not going to finish it tonight, that we do come back and do it as a group.
And I'll do what everyone else does, but that's just,
I agree, Mayor.
too.
I agree. It's just a lot, and especially, I've thought about the ag and about the rural residential, and I know we discussed it in January, which has been a minute ago, it's been 6 months ago. I'd just like to take a look at that again, just to see, because like you said, we can amend it now, but when they come to us, they only come to us for this. So if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's do it right.
So you two
I'm
are
good
going to
with
do
it.
another evening?
Please. I agree.
Emily, Karen,
I wanted to do it tonight. I wanted to get it behind us so that we could move forward.
How's the 16th for another date? That'll be the day before the next commission meeting.
the 16th.
16th.
I'm good.
The 16th.
Karen, are you able to do 4 o'clock again, ma'am? On the 16th? I know that's hard for you.
No, 4 o'clock is better than, what are we looking at now?
The 16th?
Yeah.
Y'all okay?
I'm wide open.
I'm gonna have the twins, but I think I can swing it.
Don't bring them. That'll make it very fun.
They'll probably understand it better than us.
Well,
Let Sarita pin them up down there with her.
Yeah.
She ain't even listening to us, so it's okay.
She's just too,
Emily's going to have the twins on the 16th. I said, bring them up, we'll pin them down there with Cerrito. You good, Karen? All right. So what we'll do is plan another workshop for the 16th at 4 o'clock to finish this up. And then tomorrow night, what we'll plan on doing is just asking for a continuance of this part to,
The component changes
Sir.
will continue both the LPA and the commission ordinance to the meeting on the 17th.
on the 17th. Okay?
I would really encourage, if you have, you're looking through this, you have questions, make an appointment with Lori. Go sit down, because do it in smaller bites, maybe. And for those of us whose attention spans are,
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're finding, at least I'm finding, is when someone else brings
that's
something
what I
else
was
up.
gonna
That's
say.
exactly
Yeah,
correct.
it helps me.
It does me as well.
Yeah, that's why I was encouraging that it needs to be done as a group thing. So, all right, then, anybody else have anything they'd like to share before we close this evening?
I just want to say thank you very much,
Yes.
Lori. A
Yeah,
lot of
thank
good
you.
work.
Yeah.
I
Makes a
just-
big difference.
I wish,
Yeah.
and maybe this is something for future commissioners, but if we would have had this like little class, if you will, I know this is a workshop on this, but if we would have this for,
Yeah.
as a refresher for other commissioners, but as new commissioners, it would be so much easier, so much easier. So just a little
Yeah.
thought in the future.
Yes, ma'am. And in the meantime, any one of you want to come and sit down with me and get a primer on how our form-based code works? Here's our maps. Here's how land use and design district work together. Here are all the steps in the review process that are completed before a project even comes before you. I'm happy to help you be more comfortable with our code as it relates to the decisions that you're interested in making.
Yeah, and I have to admit that I've gone and I've sat with Lori, and she's explained some things to me, and it makes it easier, but this is just a lot of stuff.
Anybody else have anything? Heather, I hope you come back to work tomorrow. Hope it wasn't too bad.
Thank you.
It's overtime.
It's overtime. We're adjourned, folks.
And then you give me an off-brand too, because
Exactly.
Don't get comfortable.
that's like a Sears and Roebuck